Welcome to Warrior Stories. My name is Susanna Clark Taylor. Today is December 7th, 2022, and my guest today is Bronwen Hale Dearden. Hi, Bronwen. How are you?
Doing well. As we discussed, long day of childcare and giving to my children, but I made
Awesome.
it.
Yep, you made it. I always like to say how I know my guests. Bronwen, you and I have known each other for a really long time, actually. Years and years and years ago, we did a lot of theater together, but much more recently, we have been collaborating on this amazing project that you started called Economic Equity for Moms, which is what we're here to talk about today. So I'm really excited to dive in and to give you one more opportunity because I know you've been working on this for a long time and in discussions with a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And I'm excited to give you just one more avenue, one more way to just explain what it is that you're doing because I think it's absolutely amazing. Starting out, why don't you tell us what Economic Equity for Moms is and why you started this organization?
So I'll give a little bit of my background story and then I'll say kind of what Economic Equity for Moms, or EAM as I call it, is now, and then what I hope for it to become. I always knew I wanted to do something to, serve marginalized groups. And for a long time, I thought that that would be teaching. I didn't graduate in teaching. I graduated in psychology, but joined Teach for America when I graduated in 2017 and taught for a year in a very challenging charter school. It was so meaningful and so hard. I was also pregnant during that whole year. And given my family background, I grew up with a stay at home mom. All my aunts had been stay at home moms. And I kind of just thought by default that's what I was going to do when my son came. But I actually thought about it, what I wanted my life to look like. And I thought, you know what? This is meaningful work, what I'm doing with these students. Like, I would love to stay on part time. I don't think I can give so much to my students emotionally every day and then still have enough to give to my family. But I would love to still be involved maybe 7 to 12 every day and then be home with my son. Like, that was my ideal schedule in my head. So kind of on a whim and just hoping something would work out, I wrote my principal. We were actually in transition. So it was a new principal who didn't know me very well. But I said, I'm pregnant and I would love to go part-time. And he basically didn't consider it. He basically said, that is not an option. And a couple weeks later, I had a full-time contract in my inbox.
Right.
So it wasn't even something that was on the table. It was just like, we don't do that. And I decided I wasn't willing to do full-time. And at that point, left the workforce to care for my son. I volunteered quite a bit and I stayed active in my church community and still felt connected to the community that way. And I was enjoying motherhood. But it really wasn't until COVID hit and all those volunteer opportunities and in-person things dropped out and motherhood was all that remained. It wasn't until then that I kind of realized this is important work, but it is stifling if that's all I'm doing. During that time, I read The Price of Motherhood by Anne Crittenden, which I recommend to anyone, unless you don't like being angry about social justice causes, in which case do not read it. But I read that and I was just galvanized about how little respect and value our culture puts on motherhood.
Right.
And I started Googling actively, looking for an organization that I could contribute to that was advocating for moms. I had previously blamed myself for the tension I was feeling between work and family. I
Sure.
really thought it was my fault for not being able to do it all
Sure.
and that I was failing to a certain extent to drop out.
Right.
And it wasn't until reading that book that I realized that it was systemic pressures
Yep.
and systemic factors
Yep.
that were making it so I had an impossible choice. I either
Right.
had to be completely away from my family for much more time than I wanted, or be home with my family for much more time than I wanted, right?
Right.
There was no middle zone where I could continue developing as an adult and still give the care that I wanted to my very young son.
Yep. There are very few careers where that is possible. Like it is really, really difficult to find that.
Yeah, and I mean, you see, like, now that I'm kind of on the other side of it, I see how women try to fix that by building their own business or by, being a contractor or a variety of other things.
Right.
But still, the system is still forcing that choice and not accommodating very many middle ground options at all, right?
And those options that you just mentioned come with huge drawbacks. The amount of income that oftentimes can be brought in, benefits, stability, those types of things. So, yeah, we're going to get into all of that. But yeah,
Yeah, it's a privilege to even seek those middle ground positions.
Exactly, because you have to have another income from a partner, and not all moms have partners. So many things get in the way of that being a possibility.
Yeah, 100%. After reading Price of Motherhood, I, was very frustrated, looked for an organization that was addressing some of these problems. I mean, the fact that we don't even have paid leave in our country, I was just looking for something that was doing what I wanted to do,
Right.
and I couldn't find an organization that was doing it. And so I was like, well, you know what? I have strong opinions on this and I want to learn more about it. I
Mhm.
might as well go public with this and share my journey as I learn about work life balance issues and as I learn how motherhood kind of exists in our cultural imagination and
Right.
as I think about what could be better. So, turns out many women were kind of doing this at the same time. Now there are
Mhm.
several organizations that are advocating for moms. Marshall Plans for Moms is a big one. The Chamber of Mothers, Mother Honestly, the Double Shift podcast, all are headed up by amazing women doing great things. And I feel like I was kind of in the cultural wave
Right.
that was making that happen.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So, since there are so many other organizations that are tackling this, what's the niche that you feel like EEM can fill?
I've struggled with that off and on for a while. At the beginning, I actually used to feel like, for example, a universal basic income was one policy where I was like, this would be great for single mothers,
Right.
for just to validate the importance of caregiving work. Then Biden passed the child tax credit, and I was like, oh, well, the most revolutionary part of my platform has already been done. Now, I used to get angry to see other people doing this work, some sort of political envy, but I've luckily gotten to the point where I'm just grateful.
For any
The work
progress.
is so monumental
Yeah.
that any progress is fantastic. And I'm happy to either actualize or advocate for it through my platform or, jump on someone else's coattails and help them with the work.
Right. Or cheer them on. Yep.
Of course, yeah. But speaking to that niche, what I do feel that EAM really offers is a place at the table for full time caregivers, stay at
Mhm.
home moms, and for women who would like to work part time or would just like a better work life balance. I do feel that a lot of these organizations, the ones I listed and others, are focused on the population of working moms, which, all moms are working, but mothers who are working for pay.
Right.
And while this is the majority of women and certainly a very important contingent to address, there are also women who are dissatisfied with how their work and family are being combined. And
Right.
that's the population that I feel like I have special understanding of and can advocate for.
Right, absolutely. And just a plug for your blog, Economic Equity for Moms, Anne McBride just wrote an amazing article called Four Myths About Working Moms in the US. And I was just reading through it earlier, and it's a really thoughtful piece. And she does a really good job of succinctly describing some of the myths around part time work and how easy it would be to overcome those myths and to provide more part time opportunities for parents.
Yeah,
So, just a plug for Eames blog. It's really great. And there's a lot of different articles on here that I think are really valuable for people to refer to.
thank you.
Okay, so I know that recently you have lived overseas. Explain policy differences that you have observed in other countries compared to the United States that are better for working moms.
We just got back from a year abroad in the Netherlands, and I'm so grateful for that experience, in large part because I didn't know before I went that the Netherlands is actually the world's leader in terms of part time work. It's actually the most common arrangement in the Netherlands for both parents to be working 4 days a week. And just
Amazing.
like for a second, think about what that means in terms of childcare. That
Right.
means that each parent can be the full time caregiver 1 day a week
Mhm.
and they only have to worry about care the other 3 days, right? So that immediately cuts your costs. It also immediately gives you time to get things done around the house, to like take some of that mental and emotional load off your plate.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it also gives you time to participate more actively in the raising of your child. And
Right.
then you're with them 4 out of 7 days a week, the majority of the time.
Right. It's much more of a partnership between those two partners rather
Absolutely.
than the majority of care work falling to mothers, which
Yeah.
traditionally is how it has been. And it is exhausting. Like you said, it is draining to be
Yeah.
the full time caregiver for children day in, day out, every day for sometimes for some families, it's decades, right?
I will say, still, there are more women taking advantage of the part time work opportunities than men.
Mhm.
Women can work even 2 days a week. I know some who work even 1 day a week, which is like, okay, that's not a lot. But teachers traditionally only work 2 or 3 days a week and classroom share, which, if you think about like teacher burnout here in the US,
Right,
how amazing would it be to share a classroom with
right.
another teacher, split the grading?
I do know there are some places here in America that do that, but it's not that common. It would be great if that became a universal opportunity for those who wanted it, right?
Right. And I think the difference is in the Netherlands, it's expected that if you want it,
Which is
I mean, in teaching, it may just even be the default that maybe you would work 2 or 3 days a week. But since it's such a cultural norm, you don't have to fight for it. But here in
amazing,
the US, you have to fight for it. And you often have to be working full time for an organization for 2 to 3, however many years
right,
before they trust you enough to give you a part time schedule.
right,
But that means that's a big barrier to entry for women
right.
who still have heavy caregiving responsibilities at home and still may want to be involved at home.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's
Um,
one thing that Anne McBride mentions in that article. Like you said, that's a huge barrier for really high quality professionals that could
yeah,
contribute so much to school districts and to companies. And really, they are missing out on some really quality employees by having such a huge barrier to part time work.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually have an interview that I'll be publishing of 3 moms who work part time in the Netherlands, one a doctor, one a civil servant, and one a teacher. And
Wow.
all three of them, they worked anywhere between one worked 2 days a week, the other two worked 4 days a week, I think.
Mhm.
But they all said that if their employer asked them to go full time, that they would quit. All of them. That says the value that they place on even just having 1 more day a week to
Right.
take care of needs at home,
Right.
to balance mentally and emotionally.
Right.
This gets to kind of the insanity of the work culture that we have here in the US, where work is life. You're not an adult if you're not in the paid workforce.
And what a shame for such highly skilled employees, as they clearly must be, for them to just quit if they were forced to work full time. So that's amazing. I cannot even imagine that here in America.
Right. But they're doing it, and they're a westernized, more
Right.
liberal country than we are, right?
Right.
They just value that a person's life is not just what they do for work, but it's also time for hobbies and relaxation and caring for others and
Right.
caring for pets and going on vacations. Like, I met several times, I'd go to a music class with both my boys, I'd be very overwhelmed, and I'd meet a mom who was there just on her mommy day,
Right.
on her day off, and
Right.
could like go to a class with her child and like go back to work the next day. It's just
Awesome.
that is an amazing policy. And of course, worked in and bundled in the Netherlands is they have a single payer health system. It's actually not through the government, it's administered by two companies. So there's a little bit of competition there, but your health insurance is not tied to your work. I was not able to work while I was in the Netherlands, and I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. I had full health insurance for myself and the boys for 128 euros a month.
Which is amazing.
Right.
Oh,
It wasn't hard to get. I wasn't a citizen,
right.
over and over. It was easy. It was straightforward. And I'm not saying immigrating is easy because
Sure.
I don't want to give anyone false hope. Immigrating to the Netherlands is very hard and took a long time. But once we were in, it was just the word that just kept coming to mind was humane. It was
Yes.
just like they saw us as people and they knew that to be emotionally and physically healthy, we needed to have good insurance. And we didn't
Right.
even have Medicaid. It was just the insurance that everyone else had. It was affordable. We had
Wow.
access to everything, and I wasn't employed. It was just because I was a person.
It just literally blows my mind.
Right. I mean, how many decisions do families make about their work arrangements because they are scared to lose their insurance, right?
Absolutely. Mhm.
It really just opened my mind to what is possible. Other examples of really great policies overseas, the UK actually requires that employers take seriously a request to go part-time. So whereas my principal just like basically wrote me off, in the UK you're required to leave a paper trail basically, showing that you considered their request and tried to make it work. But like that honors, that everyone has equal access to the possibility of working part-time. Um, and then, yeah, Sweden is incredible for paid family leave. I think you get 14 months of leave that you can split between partners. It makes you want to cry. But uh,
Right.
another book I would really recommend if you're interested in comparative family policy is Making Motherhood Work by Caitlin Collins. It does a qualitative look at mothers in the US Sweden, Italy, and Germany and compares them on family policy measures and their mental health outcomes. And it's probably obvious, but mothers in the US fared the worst and looked the worst compared to all these other countries. They were just stretched so thin
Right,
and with so little support. One little toothpick falls out and your whole day is ruined, you know?
right,
So,
right. That's amazing. That's amazing.
but I'm really grateful for the international experience because the lived experience of seeing
Mhm.
women at the parks with their kids during the day, women meeting other women for lunch on a Wednesday or whatever.
In America, they would likely be full-time stay-at-home moms that you would see at the park on a Wednesday at lunch. But it sounds like in the Netherlands, they were working professionals who had enough time off that they could enjoy those experiences with their children.
Yeah, and with their friends and taking care of
Right,
themselves, you know?
right, right. Mental health, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's I will say their economy has not suffered as a result.
I can only imagine that people work harder. You know, it seems
Yeah,
to me that they would have the energy and the mental bandwidth to work harder. There's probably less burnout.
for sure.
Yeah. Do you believe that issues of maternal justice can achieve bipartisan support? And if so, how?
Yeah, so this is super tricky. And this to me kind of gets to like where I'd like Eam to go down the line. I think all these motherhood groups are pushing for policy change.
Right,
And I do strongly believe that maternal justice issues are a great candidate for bipartisan support, at least for building a bipartisan coalition. I should have gotten the stats in front of me, but it's something like 60+% of the US supports paid leave. It's another very high percentage, like something like 70% of the electorate supports affordable childcare. You know, these are like daily bread and butter issues for so many people, no matter if you're conservative or liberal, right? And just everyone recognizes that there's not enough support and that life is just too hard right now. What's interesting is I think the left and the right both have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to this issue. The left is obviously like really interested in legislating on these issues, right? It was a big part of Biden's Build Back Better plan. Several things got brought up. You know, they wanted to extend the child tax credit, they wanted to pass paid leave, all these sorts of things. So I'm really grateful that they are trying to do something on these issues.
right,
That being said, on the left, there's kind of one picture of how a family should be doing it, and it's a two income,
right.
kind of corporate feminist
Right.
way of doing things. Where, for example, in Biden's Build Back Better plan, I like picked that thing apart. There's another article on my blog where I talk about the strengths and weaknesses of his plan. It was really great in a lot of ways, but it never mentioned full time caregivers. It didn't put any supports in for part time work or better work life balance generally.
Right.
And it did provide subsidies for childcare, more tax breaks for childcare, and things like that. And to me, the issue is when you favor one way of resolving work life conflict, you funnel people into solving it that way by becoming a two income home.
Right.
But that is not the best fit for every family. That's not what every family wants.
Right.
There's honestly not even that much data about whether or not it's good for kids, especially really young kids.
Right.
I don't think it's fair to highly subsidize childcare without having commensurate benefits for families who organize differently.
Right.
And that's not to say I don't support more affordable childcare. I certainly do. I've felt that as we've tried to find preschool for my son here in the DC area, which is crazy expensive, right?
Mhm.
But I just think you can't just look at one picture of how a family should look and legislate for that ideal family.
Right. And that's the hard thing because we have worked so hard for so long in this country and all over the world for equality for women in professional spaces. And we're doing better than we ever have been. We have a long way to go. But like you said, having women work full time is great for the families that feel like that's right for them, right? Or I should say both partners, because families think a lot of different ways. But for families that feel like they need to have a parent in the home for a certain period of time or even long term, because that's the thing with this. We should all have the choice to do things the way that we need them to be done in our own families. So for families that it's not right for them to have both parents working full time, there needs to be options. There needs to be resources. There needs to be benefits. There needs to be supports.
Exactly.
When there's not, that's when it's not just the adults that are suffering, it's the children that are suffering, right? So,
Yeah, and again, what's interesting is, like, at any given picture, like, at any given time, it's something like 70% of mothers are in the workforce and 30% are at home. But the
mhm,
thing is, those numbers are really fluid. And I don't, if you took more of a longitudinal look at any one family, it might be like, oh, mom was at home, or dad maybe, but in most cases,
right,
it's mom, right?
right,
For 5 years or 10 years while the kids were young and then back in the workforce, right? But that being said, many of these families who are in the two-parent working segment of life probably also had a period where a parent was at home. So most families experience this flux
right,
when they're in that position where one parent is leaning into caregiving.
mhm,
They lose benefits, they lose status, they lose
mhm,
social security, and that's
and
not fair. It is valuable, important, critical work that
right.
people should be able to do if they choose to do it.
Right. We need to be a nation that invests in the next generation in this way. Care work is work. It
Yeah.
is investing in the future of the nation. Like, let's get this straight, right?
Right.
And then in conjunction with that, there needs to be some policies that help parents that stay at home to caregive for certain periods of time. Better on ramps to get back into the workforce. We keep saying mothers because it tends to fall to women traditionally. Of course, there are fathers. Of course, there are, same sex couples that all of these issues apply to. But so many people, when they take that time at home to care for the kids, sometimes it's for 5 years, sometimes it's for 10, sometimes people are in their late 30s, 40s, and they want to get back into the workforce. And it's hard. It is
Yeah.
hard to climb your way back into a professional field where you may always be looked down upon because you weren't there doing all the things with everybody else for all of that time that you were gone.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with better on-ramps. I'm actually preparing to go back to school. As I was preparing for that, the thought came to mind. I wish there were scholarships for caregivers who are returning to school, like categorically. I mean, we have Pell Grants for low income students, but
Mhm.
the truth is, a lot of times, especially when a family has had one caregiver at home and one income, they don't have a lot of money to set aside for
Exactly.
the caregiver to improve her skills or talents, right?
Right.
And they're
Right.
also probably saving for their kids to go to college.
Right.
And so if there was some financial help to help women get back into the workforce at a position that they feel would be meaningful for them, and valuable, and use their skills and all that, that would help improve the workforce as well. But
Right.
the mentality just seems to be, all right, you had a baby, you can be out for 12 weeks, but then we're expecting you to be right back in. And if you're not right back in full time, then you've failed at some level.
Right, right. It does feel like a punishment for mothers who stay home for any period of time to care for the kids, when that just should not be the case. Opportunities should be available for them to return to the workforce whenever they feel like it is the right time for them. That should be a choice, right?
And
Yeah.
I will say I have learned and grown so much as a caregiver. And I like to give a bit of a picture, like, I have always been a really great student, very type A. And like, kind of the stereotype is, oh, you stay home and your brain just turns off, right? First of all, I've been very intentional about like reading the news and educating myself that way. But I just have experienced community and experienced life in a whole different way,
Sure.
a way that I will never forget. And
Right.
part of it is just seeing that there's very little social infrastructure
Mhm.
for anyone who's not in the workforce.
Right.
Like, there are libraries and there are parks.
Right.
There's almost nowhere else where I can take my kids during the day.
Right.
I mean, McDonald's, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
no communal place where, I mean, unless I get lucky and I have a really great community center or a great church support
Yeah.
system, which I have been lucky to have in different places, but sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad.
Mhm.
If you're not lucky, you just are left to yourself with your kids to
Right.
entertain them all day without any social support. Like, no one's going to do it for you. And I'm
Right.
not saying like the government needs to step in and do it for you. I'm just saying I've learned that the fabric of community is much thinner than I
Right.
used to think when I was in school. I used to think that these volunteer opportunities, always I would just see posters of like, come to this event at college or join this organization. I thought that's just how life was. People were always just like looking for ways to involve each other.
It's never a guarantee.
Yeah, and it's like a product of luck if you have active
Mhm.
mom groups there, etc. But I think that may be another consequence of the vast move towards work being the center
Right.
of life, is
Right.
that outside of work, there's not a lot. And I think we all suffer as a
Right.
result when our only connections are a 40, 50-minute commute. And then we come back to where we actually live and it's like, well, I don't even know my neighbors, you know?
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I've learned and expanded and grown emotionally and character-wise just by doing really hard work of caregiving in ways that I think definitely make me a better employee, a more patient human, and that sort of experience should be valued by
Right.
employers.
And it's part of your education, right? Your life experience that will only benefit your future employers. So let's stop punishing mothers for taking that time and view that time of being full-time caregivers as being valuable educational experience.
And not to say that everything should be monetized. I mean, like, obviously, in an employer space, yes, they should value the caregiving work. Another
Right.
issue is just society in general doesn't value the caregiving work.
Right.
And that is reflected in how employers treat
Right.
potential applicants. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the left does a great job of legislating, but has some of its understanding of what caregiving work looks like and the different iterations of how caregiving can be in families' life. It has that kind of mixed up. The right, I mean, it's weird. I mean, everyone knows we're in a weird moment politically,
Sure.
but they have been the party of the family, the religious right, etc., for almost all the time I've been alive.
Right.
Uh, and of course, have sort of lost that reputation as Trump has come on the scene.
Right.
Uh, so I feel like those bones are still there of valuing family life, but I'm just interested to see if that's going to survive and like move on to policy in any way.
Right.
There are certainly some really interesting voices on the right. Mitt Romney, of course, had proposed the expanded child tax credit that became that I think inspired Biden to put his child tax credit forward and sort of started that conversation running.
Right.
But at the same time, the right has really weird ideas about work and
Mhm.
really weird ideas about like the deserving poor. Like
Right.
often there will be when the right will propose social policy, there will be like an entry cliff. Like if you are making $0 that year, you won't get access to it because the assumption is you're lazy or
Right.
you're disabled or you've been trying to get a job or you've been a caregiver. Like there
Right.
are lots of times where you make $0 for the year and are not a useless member of society, right?
Exactly.
But it was Mike Lee and Marco Rubio, I think, that put together an alternative child tax credit plan to Mitt Romney's, but theirs was very focused on working and
Mm-hmm.
very focused on like if you work, you get these benefits, and we don't want to discourage work. But this sounds very weird to me, like being attuned to the caretaker space. You
Right.
just are ignoring that this is something that people choose to do for 5 or 10 years or however
Right.
long, and you therefore want to disqualify them from these programs. They
Right.
often will like use the terms working family, which as a caregiver, like I don't know how to take because I'm like, I'm definitely working. I'm working really hard every day.
Hard.
I'm not paid for my work, and
Right.
therefore I don't get social security, I don't get benefits, I don't get all these things. There's really, and I think this is on the left and the right, just a hyper focus on the economy in the like immediate moment
Right.
and not on the long term. And
Right.
caregiving is an investment in the long term.
Exactly. You're
Um,
investing in children, investing in the future of the nation.
right, right. And this is another area where I feel like change needs to be made. There's very little research on this
Mhm.
area. There's very little research on stay-at-home parents. Honestly, if it's a question of the research, I don't think there's much evidence that a family with a full-time caregiver is any different than a family whose children are in daycare full-time. And
Right.
that may be the case. I don't know. I haven't done nationwide surveys about this, right?
When you say research, are you talking about the impact on children when they are home with a full-time mom versus spending some hours in daycare on their psychological, emotional development, that type of thing? That's the
Yeah.
kind of research
Those,
that you have not been able to find?
they just haven't been done. Is that crazy?
That is crazy,
And like studies on like infants in childcare
right?
haven't been done. And the ones that have been done show that, and again, I don't want to dictate anybody's choices, right?
Sure.
I just want, like, I'm happy to talk about caregiving in terms of like, it's a choice I'm making for my family.
Right.
And to ask that choice to be respected and not disadvantaged in the political sphere, right? But what's frustrating is I don't think policymakers are going to listen or think about this being potentially valuable unless they see it in the research. I'm just saying these questions haven't been answered.
The research
And don't get
needs
my
to be done, right?
well, because it can really affect people. I mean, I think again, like just emotionally, what sits right with me and my conscience is like I'm totally fine with my 3-year-old to be in, I don't know, 20 to 30 hours of care a week. Like, he would be fine, I would be fine, like,
Oh,
it would be fine, you know?
right.
I just don't feel that way about a 12-week-old or a 5-month-old or like, and lots of these kids are in 40 plus hours of care. And again, I'm not blaming the parents. They don't have options, as we
Right.
discussed when we are talking about
Right.
like there are very few opportunities to work part
Right.
time. But I'm not convinced that full time care for all kids is the right choice. Like, parents should be able to make the choice that they want to make.
And
Um,
not be disadvantaged for taking that time
right.
away to
Right,
care.
and again, the right is just not talking to that experience at all. They're talking to, like, everyone needs to be full bore in the workforce or
Mhm.
else we're not gonna consider them not a working family. Yeah, so over and over again, I feel like neither side is really talking to the diversity that exists in the caregiving space.
Right.
And again, I'm happy with all of these different options of, at home, working full time, part time, whatever. I'm happy with all of those being supported, but right now, none of them are supported. Both parents working full time is a little supported.
So you
But
feel like if the research was done, then perhaps it would convince the powers that be. Let me put it this way. If the research was done and it was found that it was very beneficial to children to have, X amount of time with their parents in order to develop in the healthiest way, emotionally, physically, intellectually, all of the things, right? That perhaps policies would be put into place that would allow parents to make that choice. Not to say that some parents wouldn't choose to have both parents in the workforce, and that's fine. But maybe if the research was done, there wouldn't be so much resistance to putting policies in place to support caregiving and allow parents to take that time off that they need, and then more opportunities for on ramps to get back into the workforce later.
yeah, I mean, I do think just because our society is so driven by empiricism and science, and I, again, got my undergrad in psychology,
Right.
I respect science as a way of knowing and
Absolutely.
learning about the world. I'm just saying these studies aren't even there. And they are a little bit, and the findings are really mixed. And I don't mean to say there are no studies about childcare, because certainly there are. But for example, Quebec, I don't know, probably 30 years ago, put into place cheap universal childcare, and there was a massive influx of women to the workforce and a massive influx of their children into these like government run daycare centers.
Mhm.
And they tracked the kids and found there was a trackable increase in crime, a trackable increase in behavioral problems.
Interesting.
And this could be, subject to a lot of things, like maybe
Sure.
the care centers were low quality, or
Mm.
I mean, the care centers here in the US are, they're only 10% are considered high quality here in the US, and they're so expensive. I
Right.
mean, I'm just saying, the outcome of that nationwide push into this two-parent income worker model was
Mhm.
not great for kids.
Right.
But
Right.
we don't wanna square with that reality because it impinges on our professional development.
You're just bringing forward some really interesting ideas, some really interesting facts that I think should be considered when talking about this kind of broken space for caregivers, just how disadvantaged caregivers are. And perhaps if it was discovered that it was better for kids to have some time at home with a parent before they're placed in daycare. And again, parents that make that choice, this is not disparaging to them at all. A lot of my friends who have two working parents, they get really creative. Sometimes they're bringing in, family members, whether it's a grandma or a cousin or an aunt. Sometimes it's, half and half. They might do a couple of days in daycare and then a couple of days with grandma. I mean, they find ways to make it work. So in no way does that disparage that choice, because a little bit I'm jealous of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
the sore spot in my own life, my inability to develop professionally and to commit myself to a career. But if the research was done and if it was found that there was a huge benefit to children to have that time with a parent caregiver at home, perhaps more supports would be put into place so that more parents could make that choice and would not be disadvantaged when they're trying to make their way back into the workforce later.
Yeah. And I just want to say again, I feel like a lot of it is, do you have like a low caregiver to child ratio? Is it one specific caregiver that the child can bond to and like regulate with.
Right. Right.
Part of the issue in larger daycare centers is there's a huge turnaround because daycare providers are not treated well, not paid well, not esteemed well in society.
And isn't that
And like,
ironic that the retention rate at some of these daycare centers is so low because caring for children is so hard,
yes.
right? And I can only imagine caring for other people's children when you don't have that familial bond that motivates you to push past the point of exhaustion to do that hard work. Let's recognize how hard it is and stop disadvantaging
Yeah.
parents for
Right.
taking the time to care for kids, right?
And daycare workers and everyone, right? Like,
Yes,
just as
absolutely.
a society, we need to accept that caregiving is work and value it, give time and space for
Wonderful.
it. I'm a fan of bringing back the universal child credit, the monthly basis of $300 to $350 per kid, I think it was. All of that validates that caring is crucial to our economy
Yeah,
and crucial to the well-being of the next generation.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, if you had the power to do so, what policies would you put into place to better support families in America?
Yeah, so many obviously. Just change the regime. I mean, we have almost nothing, right? We have FMLA, which is full of holes and was just a stopgap measure that just became the long-term thing because they never got it together to get a better package, right?
Right.
And I could talk about that and the issues with FMLA all day because it's
Right.
not good
Oh, I
legislation.
know. I know. I have friends that have really been disadvantaged by what they thought would be a support for them, especially because I advocate so much in the disability world, and
Yeah.
so often parents have to take time or aren't able to work because of that full-time care for children with disabilities. And I know people who they thought they could rely on FMLA and it did not pull through for them. So,
No. What's crazy to me is there's not even special provision for childbearing. I mean, it's paid family medical leave. So you get the same type of leave if your partner gets really sick or you break a leg or et cetera, as you get if you give birth. But giving birth is a totally different thing.
yeah,
And no one says that 12 weeks is the right amount of time to be with your baby. Like,
right.
6 months is the international standard for what a parent should get for leave after giving birth. So, if I had all the power and could do whatever I wanted, certainly implementing a 6-month paid parental leave for every parent.
Right.
And I would even say, regardless of whether or not you were employed before, I don't think it's fair to tie that to employment necessarily. And then certainly supports for part time work.
Mhm.
There are lots of issues with part time work as it's presently constituted. Of course, as we discussed, not being attached to healthcare benefits, you
Mhm.
often lose 401k and retirement benefits.
Yeah.
So, strengthening supports for part time work so that you still have access to retirement and health and don't have to consider that when you choose to go part time. And then the big one that I think is unique to EAM and what I want to do with EAM is I would put in Social Security for caregivers.
Right.
I actually got this idea from Elizabeth Warren. Again, I think it's so funny that like stay-at-home mom is coded really right, but
Right.
Elizabeth Warren was I think she was a teacher and she had her aunt come and watch her children for her, but she's been really close to this world of caregiving and she understands it and she knows that it's valuable work. And what she proposed is giving the average income, whatever it is in your community, giving you that much amount of social security each year that your time is spent primarily caregiving, and
Right.
then you have something in retirement to show for those caregiving years.
Right.
Like my mother-in-law was out of the workforce for 12 years or so when she was raising her kids, and she's in her mid 50s now, and she still like thinks about that a lot and is like working off kind of the backlog of, well, my husband has all the social security, but I don't have as much because I was out of the workforce. And like that's not fair. She
So
was raising
unfair.
4 amazing children who are all pursuing advanced degrees and are becoming a doctor and a lawyer and a civil servant and public health professional, and she should get the support in retirement for that very important work that she did as caregiver. And it's just like if
Absolutely.
she had watched other people's kids for all that time, she would have gotten it.
Right.
It's just that she was watching her own kids,
Right.
and that to me
So
is
unfair.
yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, in what big picture ways do you and your family need the world to change?
First, just research on the impact of full time caregivers versus non familial care. A very controversial book in this area that I recommend with caveats. It's called Being There by Erica Komisar. We did a book review of it on our blog as well. And she has a very provocative thesis, but she basically advocates for caregivers to be given the time and space to be there with their children. In that way, I very much think it's a great book. I think it goes a little too far in some areas. But her book also suffers not having any research on the impact
Right,
of caregivers, really, or not very much. So,
right.
and then just social change to value caregiving work and to give people the time and space to do that. Professional on ramps, we talked about this. Improved social infrastructure for caregivers, more of a community network, places to go that are open to everyone. I mean, I always find when I move to a new place, I'm like, okay, I got to meet a mom at a park who's going to tell me what the WhatsApp groups are, but there's just no central place for people to gather and care for their children together. And part of this is sort of housing policy issues. We're all in our own
Yeah, yeah,
little castles and we
yeah. It can be very isolating. Absolutely.
yeah. And then social security for caregivers and then protections for part-time employees. So
Awesome. Well, you have given me a lot to think about. We've had a lot of these discussions before. I've been working with you with EEM for, I don't know, over a year now, at least. So I feel like I'm really educated in what you're trying to accomplish. But just in our discussion tonight and the other day when we were talking, I feel like I learned even more. And you clearly are very passionate about this issue. And the thing that's great is that your influence and your ability to impact this space, this advocacy space, I think you're just at the very beginning of helping to accomplish some really, really important things, some really important policy change. And I'm your biggest cheerleader. I just think what you're
thank
doing
you.
is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So, Bronwyn, thank you so much for coming on Warrior Stories and
Yeah.
sharing your story and all of this amazing advocacy work that you're doing. And, with a lot of my guests, I say, we'll keep in touch, but we literally will because we have a board meeting next week or the week after, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so,
We'll be chatting.
yes, we will. All right. Well, thank you, Bronwyn,
Yeah.
and have a good night.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Susanna.
Yep.